Greetings, everyone. Welcome from, I think, many places in the world to our TEI fall webinar. I'm Stewart Donaldson, the Executive Director of the Evaluators Institute. And we're really excited that in a few weeks, we're going to have our fall program, which involves 13 courses and will run between October 27th and November 3rd. And our presenters today are faculty at TEI and will be teaching in that program. So hope you'll take one of their courses as well as your participation in this webinar. One other quick announcement before I introduce our guest today is we are going to have a reception at the American Evaluation Association conference this year, and it will be on November 13th, which is Thursday at 5 p.m. We'll have food and drink, and everybody is welcome to join us on that. We will send out some announcements before the conference. So today we have a father-daughter team, which is a real special treat. A treat for me is two of my kids also do applied research and evaluation work. And let me start by introducing Charmagne Campbell-Patton, who, as I said, is a second-generation evaluator, but a 12th-generation European settler based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And Charmagne started working in the field in a education nonprofit, and did that for several years and became inspired by her dad's work in this area and found herself moving into the evaluation world, coming out of that deep experience in the nonprofit. She joined utilization-focused evaluation as a consultant over 10 years ago and specializes in qualitative methods and UFE and developmental evaluation. So she's very experienced across sectors and across a range of issues in evaluation, including education, youth development, climate justice, leadership development, and more, and co-founder of the Blue Marble Evaluation Network, and is the chair or co-chair of Use and Influence Topical Interest Group. She has co-authored the 5th edition of Utilization-Focused Evaluation, and she and Michael are working on the 2nd edition of Developmental Evaluation, which will be coming out next year. Joining her today is someone that needs no introduction, obviously, but I love to introduce him, so you're going to get the full version. He is the evaluator now and thought leader that I think, I could be wrong, but has the most experience in our field and has an amazing historical perspective on how evaluation has played out in society. He's been doing this for more than 55 years. So there's no one I go to other than Michael when I need what's the latest and how does it, fit with our history as a profession. He's a former president of the American Evaluation Association, and he's authored 8 major evaluation books. These are books that really have defined the field and given us new approaches and new lenses in which to do our work. He's collected a wide range of career Achievement Awards. He regularly teaches at the Evaluators Institute and the International Program for Development Evaluation Training, as well as is a regular presenter and teacher at evaluation associations across the world. He's given more than 100 keynotes and 30 state-level keynotes at evaluation associations, and is someone that is a great friend, as is Charmagne. And I think we're going to learn a lot about, what do we do now at this point in history, evaluation in a turbulent polycrisis. So please take it away, Michael.
Thank you, Stewart. That's quite an introduction. I appreciate it. I look forward to introducing you next time. I'll get even. So I'm going to share my screen and do a bit of an introduction about both turbulence and polycrisis, and then Charmagne is going to open with our framework for the new developmental evaluation book as a response to turbulence. The idea of turbulence is certainly not new. In 2013, there were two major books that came out of the International Development Evaluation Association conference, that one, Development Evaluation in Times of Turbulence, and Evaluation in Turbulent Times. The first one had the subtitle Dealing with Crises That Endanger Our Future, and that was 2013. We go back further to one of Stewart's close colleagues in those days, Peter Drucker, the great management consultant, did a book in 1980 called Managing in Turbulent Times. He said to manage in turbulent times, therefore, means to face up to the new realities, means starting out with the question, what is the world really like, rather than with assertions and assumptions that made sense only a few years ago. And he offers two major principles for managing in turbulent times that are also going to be and are relevant to evaluating in turbulent times. And that is abandoning things that are no longer relevant and innovation for things that need to happen in new ways, and distinguishes innovation from improvement, which we'll talk about. So that brings us then to our current time. I'm going to do, as Stewart suggested, being an old man, I go back to the history. I'm not going to go all the way back 55 years, but just 10 years to provide some context. In 2015, the climate change agreement, the first one was signed, almost 200 nations agreeing to keep the global climate well beneath 2 degrees Celsius. And President Barack Obama was a part of that signing. In that same year, 2015, the Agenda 2030 was adopted by the world's nations, a transformative agenda for the world we want that included the SDGs, 17 Sustainable Development Goals that included a large number of targets and the over 231 indicators. 2015 was also the International Year of Evaluation. It was a very positive, uplifting time. The theme that year of the American Evaluation Association was exemplary evaluations in a multicultural world, and Stewart Donaldson was the president who chose that theme. And it was, again, an uplifting and inspiring conference about all the exemplary things going on around the world. And we jump ahead to 2024, and the Sustainable Development Goals report last year opens by saying, the world is in great upheaval. Only 17% of the SDG targets are on track, with nearly half showing minimal or moderate progress, and over 1/3 stalling or regressing. On an Earth Day resolution before the United Nations this year, the United States mission of the United Nations opposed the Earth Day resolution for the first time in the history of Earth Day, and said in that opposition, Agenda 2030 and the SDGs advance a program of soft global governance that is inconsistent with U.S. sovereignty and adverse to the rights and interests of Americans. President Trump also said a clear and overdue course correction on gender and climate ideology which pervade the SDGs. It's a globalist endeavors like Agenda 2030 and the SDGs lost at the ballot box. Therefore, the United States rejects and denounces the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Sustainable Development Goals. A lot of change in 10 years. 2020, we got hit with the coronavirus and the increasing polarization between political and scientific perspectives. It was in 2020 the developmental evaluation really took off because everybody had to pivot. Programs had to pivot and evaluations had to pivot. I did a blog early in 2020 saying we're all developmental evaluators now because we're all having to adapt to the changes. At the same time, with social media, the infodemic of misinformation, controversial perspectives, attacks increased. And in May of 2020, George Floyd was murdered not far from where Charmagne lives in Minneapolis. And that gave a regeneration to the Black Lives Matter movement, along with the climate emergency becoming more intense. The World Wildlife Federation report in 2018 opened by saying we are the first generation to know that we're destroying the planet and the last generation that can do anything about it. The last 10 years have been the hottest on record by far. The 2023 climate change report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change involved 234 scientists from 66 countries and identified that CO2 levels are the highest in at least 2 million years on Earth. Sea level rise is at the highest in 3,000 years. Arctic sea ice is at the lowest in 1,000 years, and glaciers are retreating. In this last 10 years, a framework called planetary boundaries has been generated to look at the extent to which we are exceeding the use of the Earth's resources in ways that are unsustainable. In 2009, when that was first introduced, there were 7 boundaries of sustainability, 3 of which we had crossed. By 2015, we had crossed 4 of the 7 boundaries, meaning we were in unsustainable territory. In 2023, they had added 2 more boundaries. We've crossed 6. And in 2024, ocean acidification became the latest. The headline, Earth is on the brink of breaching the 7th of the 9th planetary boundaries that support life on Earth. What's at stake is the future of all life on Earth. And so are we in a global emergency? Well, the problem is that these things are happening too slow for people to feel like it's an emergency, but they're too dangerous to be called anything else. And so the issue is whether we go on with business as usual and carry on. We got away from business as usual during the pandemic, and I've been surprised at how quickly people pretty much return to thinking we're in business as usual. But a book that just came out this year called Overshoot from 2 Swedish scholars, it's subtitled How the World Surrendered to Climate Breakdown, opens by saying, there is no path to a livable planet that does not pass through the complete destruction of business as usual. And we are part of that. World hunger is increasing. We have wars in Ukraine, in Gaza, in Darfur, and civil strife on the increase around the world. Global inequities are increasing dramatically in the last 10 years. which brings us then to the notion of polycrisis, overlapping crises, climate, health, public health concerns, economic turbulence, increasing world hunger, violence and nuclear threat, disinformation, misinformation, global inequities can add habitat loss, pollution of land, water, and air, cyber terrorism, that these crises overlap, are interdependent, are happening together, and that's what makes a polycrisis, a vicious cycle of intersecting crises. Now we have AI on the horizon with scenarios of uncertainty, some utopian, some apocalyptic, about what AI is going to bring. And digital money, Bitcoin and cyber coins that are affecting the world financial systems. And here we are in 2025 then, with Donald Trump ending the Department of Education, the Centers for Disease Control eviscerated, the Environmental Protection Agency dismantled, attacks on universities and the press, attacks on philanthropic foundations, funding cuts across government agencies, government shutdown that we're in at the moment, climate hoax in his speech to the UN a couple weeks ago, being anti-science, anti-evidence, anti-DEI, and the people who track and observe up close this administration describe it as chaos, as turbulent. That's our context, and it's had ripple effects throughout the world. Charmagne and I are dealing with some international projects where people are very much feeling both what's happening in the US and elsewhere, including the misinformation, disinformation. We are part of the war between facts, evidence, truth, data, reality thinking versus post-truth, fake news, alternative facts, make-believe, groupthink, and distortions. And that battle is increasing. The evaluation implications then for turbulence and uncertainty include when we talk about moving away from business as usual, the dominant paradigm in planning and evaluation for the last 50 years has been a command and control paradigm. Plan your work your plan, evaluate the results. It's the notion that we are in charge, we are in control, we have agency to make things happen the way we want them to happen. The turbulence in our world is bringing that model into question. That what gets measured gets done, which goes back to the Clinton administration and Al Gore in 1992, is a part of that planning notion. And yet the doomsday clock for 2030 and the end of the SDGs loom. We don't know what's going to come for the globe after that by way of trying to handle those issues. At the recent Ideas Conference in Italy, that Charmagne and I participated in, Marie Gardner, the Executive Director of the International Initiative for Impact Evaluation, talked about a perfect storm hitting evaluation. The erosion of shared values and the mindset of international solidarity undermined, resources being cut haphazardly without reference to survival needs or to what works well and what is cost effective. This risks a highly unfortunate feedback loop, fewer resources with less evidence on how to spend them well. Evidence improves lives, but we face a rapidly growing amount of misinformation and disinformation, and the dismantling of democratic institutions before our very eyes, and loss of self-correcting independent evaluation mechanisms. Vinod Thomas, Director of World Bank Independent Evaluation Unit, is now with the Asian Development Bank, has just come out with a book entitled Risk and Resilience in the Era of Climate Change. And a big part of this analysis is distinguishing among economists between risk and uncertainty. Risk is calculated by knowing the parameters of what's possible. You have data about what the range of risks are. Risk then is a statistical exercise. Uncertainty is where we don't have those parameters, is where we don't know enough to be able to calculate the degree of risk. And much of what we're facing that I've just gone through quickly is in the arena of uncertainty rather than things for which we can actually calculate levels of risk. And so Charmaine and I did complete a new edition of utilization-focused evaluation 3 years ago that closes with commitments to making evaluation sustainable and in support of equity. One of the major new directions involved in that. And in the new edition of developmental evaluation, we're reframing the importance of developmental evaluation from dealing primarily with innovation to dealing with adaptation more generally, because we're all having to adapt in the face of this turbulence, and programs and projects and initiatives of all kinds are needing to go involve in ongoing adaptation. And that means the niche of developmental evaluation has moved from a narrow niche when the book first came out in 2011, a narrow niche of innovation, to broad applicability across the range of kinds of programs and initiatives. And it's moved from being a new approach to having become an established option. Widely being implemented, not always with great fidelity, but has become a major option on the landscape of evaluation. And as we look at the new edition and trying to help people engage with these challenges of turbulence and adaptation, we've come up with a mnemonic and a framework to try to help people make sense of developmental evaluation and how we hope to address turbulence in the polycrisis. And Charmaine is going to take you through that. You're welcome to put questions in the Q&A part of the platform, and we'll try to take on some of those after Charmaine takes you through the ADAPT framework.
Thank you. I'm just going to invite everyone to take a deep breath, because that was a lot. And, you know, we have to take care of ourselves in this time as well. In addition to adapting and thinking about how we're doing our work differently, just taking care of ourselves. So, you know, take a deep breath, and we're going to talk about our response to the polycrisis. And from an evaluation perspective, there's a lot that's happening. And this is one area where, as Michael said, we're trying to adapt. And so I'll share a little bit about what that looks like. And I will say too that he said we're writing this book, the second edition of developmental evaluation. ADAPT is our new framework, which stands for Agile, Dynamic, Actionable, Principled, and Timely. Really hard to write a book in a turbulent, uncertain time, because every time we talk to new people, we have new ideas. You've maybe been to other webinars that we've done where this was a little different. We've stuck with ADAPT, but we've changed the words a little bit over the last year or so. And so that's part of what's emerging too, is how we're thinking about this. And this is where we're at right now. And hopefully we can get the book published and it will remain relevant. But we always continue to grow our thinking as well. So we're gonna just walk you through what this ADAPT framework is and how we see it applied in the context in which Michael just talked. So first we start with Agile. And Agile is this idea to be able to move quickly and easily. We usually hear it used in the software development arena, where it's kind of this idea of agile management, dividing tasks into short phases, frequent reassessment of plans. And that's what we're trying to do with evaluation, is be more agile, be more nimble, be able to move and adapt quickly to emerging circumstances. We chose the cheetah to represent this because the cheetah is one of the most agile animals. And this is really thinking about a contrast to more of a rigid mindset that's been a very kind of traditional Western dominant mindset of planning. So we're saying moving from a fixed linear plan to more of a flexible, responsive plan that emerges and evolves. Thinking about change rather than being resistant to change and preferring predictability and stability, to think about embracing change as an opportunity to learn. In terms of making decisions, moving from more of a top-down, bureaucratic, predetermined way of making decisions to something that's more iterative and adaptive, and that decisions evolve based on evidence. And that the response to failure, rather than being a sign of weakness or incompetence, is actually about viewing mistakes as learning opportunities. So we're encouraging everyone to think about their own, where you sit, along, it's not boxes, it's a continuum, it's a spectrum, but being able to think about where your growing edge is within this, and the initiatives that you might be working with or supporting where they are, and how to move along the spectrum to be more agile. Michael already talked about agility and adaptation and action around the COVID epidemic. That was one of the most important times when we started to see this. And you saw it in, big ways and small ways. And the organizations and initiatives that weren't able to adapt, many of them had to close down. And, I think about in the education sector, all of the things that schools tried to figure out. And there were smaller schools that were a little bit more nimble, and then big districts that had, that are slower to adapt. And so part of that is thinking about within big institutions and bureaucracies, how to find those pieces of innovation and adaptation and support them in times where the whole organization may not be able to pivot, but what can you pivot and what can you adapt that will be able to be responsive? And as Michael said, this is really setting us up for what we learn in COVID, is really setting us up for dealing with the climate emergency. Anything you want to add, Michael, to that?
And our clients that we're working with are dealing with budget cuts and budget uncertainty, and having to figure out how to reallocate funds, and dealing with the tragedies of cutting off people for life and death support.
Yeah. So agility is one of the first areas that we're looking at with developmental evaluation. The next is dynamic. And so this is both an adjective and a noun, characterized by constant change, activity, or progress, as well as a force that stimulates change or progress within a system. And both are relevant in the context of developmental evaluation. So Michael already talked about this traditional evaluation model that's very command and control. You have a plan, you have inputs, activities, outputs, outcomes, impact, formative and summative evaluation. It's all very neatly, tightly defined. And most of us know that that's not what things look like. Things are more likely to look like this, where you have inputs growing, activities going different directions based on what's needed. And you're trying to hold that line to the vision and being able to make decisions about at each fork in the road. That's a developmental learning opportunity. Innovation and adaptation are full of these forks in the road, but being able to actually make informed decisions and think about what might lead you towards the vision that you have and what's leading you away from them is the role that developmental evaluators can play. And that's the dynamic environment that we're working in. And so what that environment calls for are dynamic designs. And there are lots of things that go into making evaluation designs more dynamic, but the ones that we're lifting up are complexity, systems, rigor, and context. We've talked a lot about the context and just being attuned to the context in which you're working and being able to be agile within that. And that means that things are going to have to change. When we talk about complexity, we are thinking about this difference between what's simple, where there's a lot of certainty and agreement, what's complicated, where there might be not very much agreement, but you can figure it out, it's not too uncertain, to moving into that realm of complexity where there's not a lot of certainty or agreement. And that's where we're working right now. And that requires us to attend to complexity concepts like emergence, uncertainty, nonlinearity, adaptation, dynamics, coevolution. And so we're really saying that to be dynamic in this environment, you have to understand complexity concepts and apply them in your designs to be more flexible and emergent. Systems are the other piece, and there's been a ton of development in the systems field, and the principles for systems thinking and evaluation are one of our guideposts for doing systems thinking that looks at interrelationships, boundaries, perspectives, and dynamics, and applying this and helping the folks that you're working with to apply systems concepts in their design as well as in your evaluation design is increasingly important. And there are lots of other ways to be thinking about systems. I saw that Dr. Nikki Bowman is on the call, or was, and has a really incredible 7 Directions Medicine Wheel framework that she's been sharing widely that looks at systems from Indigenous perspectives. And there's lots of different ways to be thinking about systems, and just being sure that you're engaging in that conversation is really important when we're thinking about dynamic designs. And then we've got rigor. And so we're thinking about rigor as different from, not surprisingly, I'm sure you've heard Michael talk about this, we're not talking about the gold standard of randomized controlled trials. We're talking about rigorous engagement. And so when we say rigor, our principle is about applying evaluative thinking in practical wisdom and situationally and culturally responsive methods from a values-inspired framework that inform empirically grounded decision-making and action. And so putting all those together, complexity, systems, rigor, and context is what we're talking about when we're talking about dynamic designs. And Michael's just going to give one example.
We, as part of the Blue Marble Network, facilitated for a year dialogues in preparation for the World United Nations Food Systems Summit in 2021. We facilitated analysis of over 1,000 dialogues around the world about the future of food systems. And as those dialogues emerged and we were doing the analysis, it became clear that we needed to take some deep dives into some of the major topics that emerged. That wasn't in the original design. It was just analyzing the dialogues overall, but we had to change the design and got support to do that, to take deep dives into the role of women, into the role of youth, into how people were approaching systems, dealing with small farmers. We did 6 deep dives and had people brought on board to do the analysis of dialogues around those themes that brought a whole additional dynamic perspective to the presentation at the UN.
Yeah, and it's really about this importance of not staying rigid in your contracting and what you said you would do. Being agile in the dynamic space means that things may have to change, and building that into expectations is part of what we encourage. You can't just, set up a contract for 2 years and expect nothing to change anymore. So being responsive and willing to engage in that is critical. Moving on to our second A is actionable. So this really is rooted in utilization-focused evaluation, being useful, but having a practical value and being done and being acted upon. So I like this cartoon, which is about talking about the elephant in the room. Now that we've talked about it, what are we going to do about it? And some of what we've drawn upon and learned from are Jane Davidson's book about actionable evaluation, and she offers 6 different things to think about in making evaluation actionable: the purpose, the engagement strategy, the questions, how to make sure that the answers to those questions are well-reasoned, and that reporting is succinct and doesn't get lost in the details, and that answers and insights are actionable, that there's actually something that can be done, and that those are based in what's possible and not theoretical. We also do a lot with the adaptive action framework from Glenda Eoyang, and this is just kind of a deceptively simple framework where we look at what is developing, what are the data showing, so what are the implications, what are some things that we might be able to do in response, and now what is our next wise action? And that doesn't necessarily mean now what 10 years from now, that means now what now. And so we continue to do this cycle frequently and use the data in real time to make decisions. Michael's going to talk about another example here.
You did work with studying youth homelessness in Minnesota with 6 different shelters and outreach programs for homeless youth that involve case studies with the homeless youth about their experiences. And when that work generated a set of principles, and the cases, if this hadn't been planned at all initially, but they were found the cases so powerful that they began using them for staff development. They centered their staff development sessions around going through the cases and looking at them from the perspective of principals. They used them in hiring new staff. They would give a case to a person who was interviewing and ask them, how would you respond to a youth in this situation? They used it with their boards to help them understand better what they were doing. They used the cases in their proposals for additional funding. And one of the shelters got major money. They were involved in a capital campaign to expand the number of beds they had for the shelter, double the number of beds. And when they had the architects chosen to do that work, they gave them the principles that we had generated and said, we want a building that does this. And so everything about that work ended up being actionable.
And that is a great segue into our next letter P, principled. And so Michael mentioned our 5th edition of utilization focused evaluation and the developmental evaluation book. What came out of that was principles focused evaluation, and that example of the homelessness principles are in that book. And developmental evaluation is based on a set of principles as well that emerged through the Exemplars book that was published. Was it after principles focused evaluation that the Exemplars book came out?
Yes.
2015.
Yeah.
That identified a set of principles that once developmental evaluation had been operationalized for a few years, we were able to start looking at what was really core to that. And we uncovered with Kate McKegg and Nan Wihipihana and Michael wrote that book and uncovered a set of guiding principles that are statements that provide guidance about how to think or behave towards some desired result based on norms, values, beliefs, experience, and knowledge. And we have now updated those principles based on more recent events. And just to kind of contrast principles with rules, the idea is that, with a rule or a recipe, you have a very specific thing, like season with a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, versus the adaptive principle, which is to season to taste and situation. That may be dietary restrictions, cultures, seasons. And so it's also distinguishing SMART goals, which everyone is familiar with: specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based goals. In the context that Michael described in this turbulent polycrisis world, those are really hard to do. And so we contrast that with guide principles that are guiding, useful, inspiring, developmental, and evaluable. And the guide framework that was presented in the Principles Focused Evaluation book has been widely adopted for principles-based initiatives that are trying to develop their own principles. And that is why we wanted to create something similar for developmental evaluation. And the inspiration for ADAPT was the guide framework, because it often, even though developmental evaluation is complex and it has this set of principles, we wanted people to have a mnemonic to be able to remember it. That said, these are the updated principles of developmental evaluation. So at the core is the overarching principle, which is that developmental evaluation supports adaptation and innovation. It has to be connected to the situation. So situational alignment is a second principle. Everything is connected to what's happening in the context. Its foundation is utilization-focused evaluation. And the pillars are rigorous engagement and co-creation. And we have systems thinking and complexity within the middle. And the newest principle that was not in the original set is expansive accountability. I'm just going to talk about that really briefly, because I think it's worth calling attention to. Michael did some work with the Blandin Foundation several years ago where they developed a mountain of accountability. Because a lot of the questions around developmental evaluation are, well, that sounds great, but how are we going to be accountable? Like, there's lots of things that we have to report on, things that we said that we would do. And so we're not saying that you necessarily have to get rid of all of those things, that you do still need a strong foundation of basic accountability where you're thinking about, financial responsibilities and numbers served. You're still thinking about impact, what's happening out there, gathering data about that, but that this accountability for learning and development and innovation and adaptation is often what's missing to really move towards the fulfillment of the mission. And so we're adding that to say that these things build upon one another and they feed back into one another is really key. And in the area of accountability for learning and development, we're looking at how are the world and the systems that we work in changing, and how do we understand those changes to learn and adapt and develop. So that's where reflective practice, developmental evaluation comes in. But adding to this, rather than just having accountability for learning and development, we're also really leaning into what we're learning about relational accountability from Sean Wilson in Research's Ceremony, and many others who have been writing about this idea of that we have to situate ourselves within the work and be accountable to the people that we work alongside, accountable with, in relationship, and ensuring credibility and responsiveness, accountable for the way that we practice and the quality of what we do and the consequences of our actions, and accountable as culturally responsive evaluators to care for people and planet. So this idea of expansive accountability situates that mountain of accountability in the ecosystem, thinking about what are the roots, where have we been, and what are all the elements, living and non-living, and air and water, and all of the things that connect to our system that we're living in and how we're accountable to that. So that's how we're thinking of accountability in this expansive way. And that's new to this edition of developmental evaluation and really critical in the context that we're living in, where things are so turbulent. Like, what is really core and what's holding us together in that is this idea of expansive accountability. We have just an example of a principles-based program or initiative that we worked with. So principles guide developmental evaluation, but as Michael said, they can also guide the initiative. And the homelessness principle example was one. Catalyst Now, which used to be Catalyst 2030, but they have adapted as well, have a set of principles. They are a network of social entrepreneurs that are working around the world to support what was originally support the Sustainable Development Goals, but are thinking beyond that as well now. And they have a set of principles, and their evaluation, part of their evaluation is focused on determining the extent to which they're living into these principles and that the principles are guiding them in the ways that they need to be moving. And so that's just one of many examples of the way that principles, particularly in the turbulent polycrisis, can help organizations that are coming together from a lot of different contexts to have something that holds them together that can be evaluated, but doesn't trap them into doing everything the same way, because we know that that can't work in the world that we're living in, that things need to be emergent and adaptive, and principles allow for that. And then finally, we come to T, timely. And timely feedback was an original principle of developmental evaluation, but we've elevated it here to the mnemonic because we really feel like this is critical to thinking about not being bound by specific timelines, but that timely means being useful, opportune, a favorable or useful time. And there's a quote from Kate McKegg, who has been doing developmental evaluation since the beginning, about timeliness and how important it is, and this need to build in regular ongoing opportunities for feedback, discussion, sense-making, and adaptive decision-making. And when we think about timely, traditional evaluation is that you deliver your reports on time and the date specified in the contract. But developmental evaluation means that you are looking at what is emerging and how to target the delivery of your findings to be useful for informing decisions and learning opportunities, and you're monitoring that ongoing. So that may change. And then you need to be agile and adapt your designs in response to that. It also means looking at both short-term and long-term. So short-term, real-time, immediate feedback that can feed into longer-term assessments. But this no longer means midterm and end-of-year project reports. This means ongoing, iterative, adaptive timelines that really look across timelines. It also means doing retrospective developmental evaluation, where you're looking at how did an organization or initiative come to be and what can we learn from that to then look forward. And then I'm going to let Michael talk about the timeliness and transformation connection as well, because we have here a quote from the Earth Day Declaration that was made in 2024 by a number of colleagues around the commitment to transformation, and this connects to being timely in another way.
And Charmaine, if you would stop sharing for a moment, I'm going to share something that's timely.
Okay.
The first question in the Q&A was, given all the turbulence that we described and the challenges, is there any hope, and how can evaluators be hopeful? And I want to share in a timely fashion that just came out, was launched 2 months ago. There is a new document, Global Evaluation Agenda, from Eval Partners that lays out a positive contributions evaluation can make. This is at the Eval Partners website. It's available in a number of different groups. The International Organization for Cooperation and Evaluation was a part of this. IDEAS, the International Evaluation Academy, the Eval for Action, Eval Indigenous, the put together a vision of the role for evaluation in times of turbulence, looking at how the various threads of evaluation can come together around a common global agenda, around people, peace, property, and planet. And it lays out these elements and constitutes a global agenda of national and regional associations can better collaborate to address issues like climate change, biodiversity, pollution of air, land, and water, ocean acidification, and humanitarian emergencies that span the different boundaries. And it calls on us to not be discouraged or to accept denial, that we evaluators do not go quietly into the future to be enveloped and defeated by the darkness of denial of facts, denial of evidence, denial of climate change, denial of basic human rights. We evaluators commit to being part of the solution and not a deepening part of the problem. And so I commend to you for your consideration as a very timely document that's just come out that forecasts the work that we can do as evaluators worldwide for the dealing with the turbulence. And you'll find that on the Eval Partners website. Back to you.
Well, I think that we're ready for a few more questions. I know we don't have a lot of time. We always take more time than we mean to, but if there are other questions that are burning, Michael started with one. Stewart, you want to lift anything else up? You're muted though.
There's a theme in the questions around funders and them funding traditional evaluation. How do you work with, budgets with constraints and get new work in this traditional evaluation funding environment?
It's really an interesting challenge. At the IDEAS conference, one of the plenary presentations from a major international funder was the major budget work that they've put in to climate work around mitigation and adaptation. Mitigation involves solving a particular problem. If you've lost an ecosystem or a waterway and you're restoring it, and you can put together a plan about how to do that. They're having trouble funding adaptation because it doesn't involve a plan about exactly what you're going to do. It is responsive, it is dynamic, and they're having to rethink their funding because it really amounts to having a group of people who are going to take on an issue and saying, because of who they are and their vision and competence and skills, we're going to fund them to figure out how to adapt in a changing space. And it means then moving and venture capital funders are used to this, from just funding plans to funding communities of people who are brought together to engage adaptively and to use contingency kind of funding mechanisms. There's some philanthropic foundations that are catching on to this. International agencies are struggling with it. The accounting people hate it because it means they have to be more flexible as well. But we have to pressure for that because the traditional ways of writing proposals and budgeting are a major barrier to being agile and responsive going forward.
And the more of us that respond to RFPs with responses that encourage them to be doing a developmental evaluation instead of what they're asking for, or to be asking the questions when you are contracted about what will it take to change the contract if we need to, and how much can we build in that, those are the questions that we have to be asking and we have to be pushing, as well as making the case behind the scenes. We are seeing more than ever before requests for developmental evaluation. They don't always know what they're getting themselves into, and some of them regret that they asked for that, I think, because it means so much different than what they thought. But I think that it's about us really feeling confident making that case and not just responding to things that don't make sense.
Great. We want to save 5 minutes at the end, so I'm going to just ask one more question and then I'll turn it back over. What are your thoughts about when you put all the dynamics of the Polycrisis together, like you did for us, the dangers to our democracy and what evaluators can do in that context?
That's really an important question right now, and I want to turn to the wisdom of one of the people that we respect the most, Stewart, and we have had a lot of past work with, Eleanor Chilinsky, who we lost a couple years ago. Eleanor was one of the founders of our field, and she was especially concerned about the relationship between theory and practice. She was the founder of GAO's Government Accountability Office's Program Evaluation Methodology Division, probably did more evaluations at that high level than anybody has ever done or probably ever will. She had 80 to 100 people, 40 to 50 evaluators produced any given year, covered everything. And she talked about, she was a former AEA president, telling the truth to the people who may not want to hear it at all is, after all, the chief purpose of evaluation. In her final interview at the forum, Chilinsky Forum, she was asked, what was the most important thing we've achieved during our 45 years of evaluation at that time? And she said, I'd say you need to look beyond the individual effects we've had on specific policies or programs over time, even though many of these effects have been substantive and consequential. In my judgment, the major accomplishment of evaluation has been the establishment and demonstration of trustworthy, dependable tool in government for carving out and preserving political accountability. She went on to say, so we have to get it right, because if we don't try and don't succeed and systematic evaluation of what the government is doing becomes a thing of the past, then our failure would affect not only evaluation itself, but also our democracy and its political freedoms. When you come right down to it, we, evaluators, are like canaries in the mine shaft. Our presence means that public accountability is alive and well. But if we go, the nation will have lost a lot more than evaluation. Evaluation is critical to democracy. Eleanor Chilinsky was at a place to understand that perhaps better than any of us, and it gives us a call to action to be sure to protect evaluation as part of our contribution to protecting evaluation, democracy.
Well, great. Well, let me turn it back over and have you close it for us.
So as a family venture, Charmagne and I working together, we brought my oldest son into the fold as a party to help us communicate about evaluation. Brandon has done some songs that have evaluation lyrics to songs you know. And last year, he did a song to Tracy Chapman's Fast Car. And we want to close out with that because the theme of that song is Can We Be Fast and Smart, which relates to both timeliness and agility. So this is Brandon.
Can we be fast and smart? Find new viewpoints to elevate. Maybe we form a team. Maybe together we can innovate a way to make things better. Lots at stake, there's plenty to lose. And maybe we fail but fail forward. Keep on learning so we always improve. Can we be fast and smart? Can we engage and contextualize? Some truths are inconvenient, sure. Let's challenge funders to decolonize. For some it's a bridge too far, but let's heal the scar and hear the unheard. Let's amplify their voices and try to inform about the lives they're living. See, this whole world's got a problem. World's getting warmer, that's the way it is. We know our earlier goals ain't working. Those earlier goals should get crossed off a list. Pivot to long-term thinking. Short-term thinking's what got us here. Evaluation can illuminate. With fresh perspectives we'll persevere. And remember, always learn from the past. Even when the data's coming fast, find the knowledge in all bad choices, amplify and empower all voices. Try and try again, that saying's close but a little wrong. Try and then evaluate so you can be someone who knows when some things well done. Can we be fast and smart? Or will we just keep cruising while we fail to act? We still burn CO2. We've changed to the market and alternative facts. Can we make things better? Do the work, outdate the outmoded. Everything's helter-skelter. We need better data and better endeavors. And remember, always learn from the past. Even when the data's coming fast, find the knowledge in all bad choices, amplify and empower all voices. Try and try again, that saying's close but a little wrong. Try and then evaluate so you can be someone who knows when some things well done. Can we be fast and wise? We got a job where we decide what's good. Try to change old thinking and raise the bar. Help the disempowered get understood. They are hoping for better, so evaluate it and keep on solving. Rework plans that ain't going nowhere. Learn from mistakes and keep evolving. Build a future that connects humans with the earth. Strive to show we know everyone's worth. Empower new eyes to surmise how to work together, agile and wise. Co-create beyond smart goals from the past. Co-create a world vision that can last, that can last, that can last. Can we learn to be wise and adapt to keep disaster at bay? We've got to make a decision, evaluate or live and die this way.
Okay, well, thank you, Michael. Thank you, Charmaine. Great ending. And thank you all for being with us here today. This will be a recording that you can use and show to others. It'll be up on the TEI website. Take care.